Excellent. So I'm going to go ahead and start recording, and I'm going to share my screen with you guys. And then if I could just get verbal confirmation from one student, any student, can you hear my mic and can you see my screen?
Yes to both.
Awesome. So this presentation is going to be all about systematically approaching the writing process. And the reason why I like to go over this is because a lot of students make the mistake of not having a strategy or really even a writing process for that matter. If it sounds familiar to get an assignment, wait a couple days, maybe a day or two before the deadline, and then you start working on the assignment. You try to pound it out in maybe an hour or two, and you research as you go, and it's just kind of like a Frankensteinian mix of all these ideas, and there's really no cohesion. You just throw it together, you wing it, and see what happens. If that sounds familiar, um, you need some work, and you definitely need this PowerPoint. Uh, and even if you don't think that you're much of a writer, or maybe you struggled with English in the past, there's probably a good chance that you were never taught a systematic way to approach the writing process. And in fact, even a lot of colleges nowadays tend to just grace over this idea without giving it much attention, which is why I like to really dig into it. So I like to teach 5 stages to the writing process, and it's not the only one out there. There's some that are 3, 4, 7 stages, 8 stages, who knows? I like 5 stages. It's easier to remember that way, right? Now, we have these stages here. Stages 1, preliminary thinking. Stage 2, researching. Stage 3, thesis statement and outlining. Stage 4 is drafting. Stage 5 is proofreading, editing, and revising. If you look in a textbook, it might just kind of list them out like this and maybe say a word or two about each of them without really going into the hows or the whys. Um, you could get some ideas from that, but really, what I want you to do is come away with this with a whole new outlook of the writing process. So I like to kind of use a metaphor for the stages of the writing process, and I like to compare it to building a house. So if we're going to build a house, it's going to take time, it's going to take planning, it's going to take research, it's going to take all these things to make it all come together so you can live under a roof that isn't, terribly leaky. So we got stage 1, the preliminary thinking phase. So when it comes to writing, the preliminary thinking phase begins the moment you get an assignment. Um, when you start thinking about a topic or an idea or anything that you could potentially write about, that's when it starts. Um, Stage 2, that's when you actually start researching the feasibility of it. But if you're going to build a house, stage 1 would be like, well, I want a 2-story house. I want a little bit of land. I want to be in the country where I have no neighbors. I want it to be somewhere where there's a decent school district. I don't want the property taxes to be too high, stuff like that. Um, it's all good to have ideas, but until you start researching it, that's all they are. They're just ideas. Now, when you get to the researching phase, let's talk about this house that we're going to build. Um, Maybe there's some protected land that you got to be careful of. Maybe you look at these school districts that you thought were decent and they're actually not very good, or maybe they're better than what you thought. You start looking at the building codes, you start calling contractors, you start getting quotes for the prices that your project's going to cost. You get a timeline, an estimation of uh, how you can proceed with this project and how long it's going to take. You start turning these ideas slowly into reality. You haven't broken ground yet. You haven't poured the concrete foundation yet. Nothing like that has happened. You're just getting ideas, you're researching them, and you're putting together a game plan. And that's what stage 3 is. That's your game plan. That's your blueprint. Um, and once you have that blueprint kind of set and you know exactly what's going to happen, you have all the contractors lined up, you got a firm timeline, you know where you're going to go from point A to point B, you know when contractors are coming and going, everything's already planned out, you got the quotes, there's no surprises. That's when you can pour the concrete foundation, you could start building the framing of that house, you can start putting together something that somewhat resembles a place you can live. And that's what stage 4 is. That's when you're actually building that house. And this is what a lot of students think the writing phase or the writing process is. They skip stages 1 through 3 all together, and they just pick up the nearest hammer and pick up the nearest nails, and they start putting boards together. And that's what you want to avoid. You don't want to do that. Um, and then stage 5, proofreading, editing, and revising. You could think of that as just checking your work as you go, right? You want to measure twice, cut once. You know, you don't want to cut one or measure once and cut 14 times. Just check your work as you go. Make sure everything's the way it was supposed to be according to that blueprint. Now, we're going to expand on this a lot. So that's just kind of the basic idea, right? But there's also this audience analysis that's really important here. Now, with a college paper, you might be thinking, well, who's my audience? I'm just writing this for a class, I'm writing it for a grade, writing it for my professor. It's not like the workplace where I'm writing it for my supervisor or something. Well, yeah, it's good that you recognize that, there's an audience that needs to receive our message. And when it comes to academic writing, you're probably right. There's really no uh, purpose beyond most of these writing assignments besides getting a grade. But let's be real, getting a grade is important too. And what determines a grade? It's not the professor, it's the grading rubric and the instructions. So, what I want you to do is think of the audience uh, for your essays as as the grading rubric. If you think of the grading rubric as your audience, you can never go wrong because it tells you exactly what it wants, what it needs, and it sets it up in nice little categories and criteria that it's looking for. And usually they're pretty detailed about what they want. And instructors will never grade outside that rubric. In fact, we're trained to use those rubrics to make sure that, everything is standardized and fair and blah, 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 right? So when in doubt, use the grading rubric as your audience. Now, let's put this in the context of our metaphor, building this house. Let's imagine we're not building this house for ourselves anymore. You're building it for a client. This client has specific needs. Um, this client, let's say in the preliminary thinking stage, they want a ranch home. They don't want 2 stories because they're handicapped. So now they need handicap accessibility in this home as well. And they want to be within a certain distance of the nearest hospital because they got a pacemaker. So all of a sudden you start thinking, well, the preliminary thinking phase is very different now because we have a new audience. You're starting to think beyond just your needs and wants. You're thinking about what your potential audience is going to need. And that's going to influence what you research, right? So instead of just looking up the nearest school district and how well it is, you're going to be looking up, well, is this a ranch home? Is it going to be handicap accessible? How far is the nearest hospital? Right? We're going to be totally researching something totally different. Yes, the building codes, the quoting, and all of that stuff is still important. You're not going to neglect that part of your research. However, there's some nuances here that change. And that should also be reflected in the thesis statement and outline. So the way you build the blueprint for your handicap accessible ranch home is going to be very different than if you're building a home for yourself, a 2-story out on the back road, middle of nowhere. The nearest Walmart is 35 minutes away, right? It's going to be very different than that. So the purpose for your writing should always cater to this audience, and the purpose for your writing should always follow a very true and honest research, and then a blueprint or some sort of game plan to make it happen. And then once you have all this information set, it should take you a few days to really go through this process. It should take a day or two to do each of these stages. Then when you get to the drafting stage, when you're actually writing the paper, you'll be surprised how easy it comes, because everything's already been planned out, laid out. You've already got your research. You know all the points that you're going to talk about in your paper. It's just a matter of putting it onto the page and actually doing it. It's a matter of, you know, turning this blueprint into an actual house, right? And then check your work as you go, making sure that nothing's crazy as far as formatting or grammar, mechanics. I always say, like, you could have the best ideas. Um, you really could. You could have the best ideas, but if you don't have a professional appearance when you present them, immediately your audience or your readers are going to be like, what else is wrong? So let's imagine, right? Everything's perfect. Inside the house, everything's perfect. But when the client drives up to the door for the very first, or drives up to the house for the very first time, and they look at the house and they wanted a certain color siding and a certain color roof, and both of them are completely wrong, and the landscaping's completely wrong, they're going to look at it and be like, um, what else is wrong? What else is wrong? Even though everything else could be perfectly fine, immediately they're going to be taken aback, and it's going to hurt your credibility. Now, recursive loops and milestones. This is something I've already kind of alluded to a little bit, but something that is worth going into a little bit more depth on. So we have stage 2, there's a recursive loop there. Stages 4 and 5, there's a recursive loop. And what a recursive loop is that you can bounce back and forth between these stages as many times as you want without jeopardizing the final product of your essay. What'll happen is, if you try to jump between stages 4 and stages 2, you research and then you draft, and then you research and then you draft. That's when you run into problems. But if you stay in these 2 loops on the outside like this, you'll be perfectly fine. So ideally, a good researching strategy will lead to more questions and more ideas, which should lead to more research, which should lead to more ideas. So you can circle back and forth between those as many times as you need. Just like when you're doing your construction phase, right? You're building the essay. It's a wise idea to check your work as you go, making sure that you're on point, making sure things are polished, professional, and ready to go as you're writing. So, you write a sentence, you revise it, you check it, proofread it. Write a paragraph, check it, proofread it, revise it, and just do that as you go. It's kind of like if you're cooking dinner and you're cleaning up as you're cooking, right? That way you don't have a big messy kitchen at the end. Some people, they like to cook and then they make a big mess of the kitchen, and then they're like, oh, look at all this work I have to do at the end. That's definitely not me. That's my wife. She does that. She likes to cook, and then there's a big old mess at the end. Me, on the other hand, I'm a big recursive loop guy. As I'm cooking, I like to clean as I go. That way, when I'm done, everything's already done, and I don't have to waste too much time cleaning up after that. So if that's something that you can relate to, you can apply that same kind of habit to your writing process. Just clean it up as you go. It's a whole lot easier that way. Now, the thesis statement and the outline is important, because once you get to this point, you don't really want, you can go back and you can rework your research, and you can get some new ideas, and that can influence your thesis statement. But generally, what you want to do here is get a very firm blueprint that you can follow step by step, something that will have all your ideas laid out before you. So you know exactly what you need to do at exactly the right time with the exact outside sources. Um, because when you get to the drafting stage, what you don't want to do is have to go backwards. You don't want to have to go and rework your thesis statement and rework all the research that you did. Everything should just be ready. This is your game plan. And when you get to game day, you don't want to abandon all the preparation that you gave your team beforehand, right? You kind of want to stick to your game plan as much as possible. You can make some halftime adjustments if need be, your stage five. Um, but really, what you want to do is kind of follow through with your vision at that point. Now, let's go through each stage here. I'm not going to go crazy in depth here, but again, we're looking at things from an abstract view, a bird's eye view. That way, we have a better understanding, again, of systematically approaching the writing process. So, preliminary thinking, stage one, anything you can do to get your ideas on paper is what you're going to want to do. So, brainstorming, doodling, clustering. Clustering is just creating arbitrary categories and putting ideas in those categories. So something that we do all the time is clustering with when we're putting away dishes, right? So we cluster spoons with spoons and forks with forks, knives with knives. You can do the same thing with your ideas. You can cluster them in any sort of category that you like, as long as you find it meaningful to you. And that could be a useful tool when you're thinking about what you want to write about or how you want to approach a certain topic. You could use mind mapping. That's kind of like a blend between doodling and brainstorming. And again, if you're a creative type, just get a big sketch pad and write your ideas on there. You can make big old circles and connect them and do whatever you need to do. If you're creatively inclined, not like me, definitely go for it. I think a lot of things are so digital now that um, having a notebook to just write in something and it doesn't need to have lines. Again, a sketchbook, no lines. It's just a blank piece of paper. It's a great way to get your ideas onto the page without feeling limited or overwhelmed by anything. We're so digital. We're so caught up in our phones and caught up in little notebooks and the notes on our phone. Everything's small. Um, it can be very refreshing if you just break out a notebook with no lines and just start going and writing down your ideas. You'll be amazed at what you can accomplish that way. Free writing, this is basically just writing down, brain dumping all the information you know about your topic, and just getting those ideas out and getting them onto paper. Just be mindful, though, there's a caveat here. Uh, don't mistake this for drafting. This is not stage four. This is stage one. So recognize it for what it is. When you free write, that's just, again, brain dumping, diarrhea of the mouth. Get the words out, get the ideas out. Um, that's not writing. That's not the writing process. And maybe that has worked for you in the past, but that is more based on luck than anything else, if you made it through that. Again, what I don't want you to do is skip stages one, two, and three and go straight to pouring a concrete foundation without any sort of pre planning beforehand and grabbing the nearest hammer and bucket of nails. I don't want you doing that. I want you to do your diligence, make sure you're approaching everything systematically, with a good game plan in mind. A curiosity exercise, that's probably one of my favorites, of the stage one preliminary thinking tools. And one thing I like to recommend is setting a timer for 10, 15 minutes and just write down as many questions about your topic as humanly possible. Don't worry about grammar, mechanics, style, anything like that. Just get the ideas out, get the questions out, and then walk away for 30 minutes, an hour. Walk away, go to work, and come back to it later that night or the next day. And then look carefully at those questions. Look for themes. Um, look for any sort of rephrasing of questions. Maybe you notice you ask the same question 4 or 5 times and just in a different way. And that's going to give you an idea of where you can take your research, um, when it comes to stage two. So really what we're doing here, we're bridging stages one with stage two by starting to get an idea of where we can start going with our topic. And that's really what stage two is all about. It's following up on those questions. And ideally, we want open ended questions because the closed questions, yes, no questions, they're just going to lead you down these dead ends. It's going to give you an answer real quick, and then it's like, okay, now what? But those open-ended questions, that's when you're going to dig into that gray area of most controversial topics, where you can start looking for those blind spots in arguments or anything of that nature, right? So we want to go down the rabbit hole. We want those questions to spur more questions, just like that recursive loop between stages one and two. Let your questions lead you to more questions, more sources to more sources. And ultimately, what you're getting accomplished by doing this is you're getting more versed in the discourse or the conversation of the literature. You're starting to build a network of ideas where it's more intertwined than you think. It's something called intertextuality. This intertextuality means that all these sources are speaking with or amongst each other, and there's a conversation that you're walking into, and you're trying to understand it for the first time. And maybe you've known some of the conversation beforehand, but this time you're actually going to start getting involved in it. So, moving on here, we also have a working thesis. We're going to talk more about thesis statements in a couple slides, so I'm not going to go over that one too much. Focusing on high quality sources, there's two main points here that I want to talk about. So you want to research all the perspectives, not just the ones you agree with. Again, if we go back to the prevalence of audience analysis, we're not always writing for ourselves. Sometimes we're writing for others. And it's really important from at least an argumentative standpoint to be just as well versed in the perspectives that you don't agree with as the ones that you ultimately support. And I'm going to go more into that later on, but it's very wise to conduct research on all those perspectives because then you present yourself as a more credible and objective writer than one that just cherry picked evidence and attacked the straw man. And that leads me to that third point, the one at the bottom there. Never research to prove, always research to find out. That's integrity first, right? That's sticking to the truth and being honest with yourself and also being honest with all the information that's available out there. That's very important. That's very important. So here's a quick overview of some researching strategies that I find very useful to talk about here. So cross-referencing is essentially finding more than one source that supports the same conclusion. So-and-so said they found this in their research, and so-and-so also found the same thing in their research. Therefore, it's cross-referenced, and we can say that's a stronger piece of evidence than if it was just one or the other. And sometimes when you cross-reference, it's not always going to lead to a greater confidence in the information. Sometimes you'll have conflicting evidence. So one source says this, and the other one says the opposite. Again, that would be a cross-reference, just in the opposite way. So instead of them supporting each other, we found a conflict. So that's important. That's important to recognize and at least acknowledge that in our research. Objective peer-reviewed publications, that's pretty self-explanatory. You want to make sure that you're going into the virtual libraries and finding good, credible academic sources. Filtering is super important. This is a skill that will lead you to a much success in academic research. So every time you go into the virtual library and say you type in some sort of phrase for your topic, you're going to get like 100,000, sometimes more articles that pop up. And obviously, you're not going to sift through all that. And even the ones at the top, they might say they're the most relevant, but usually they're not. And usually they're not helpful whatsoever. So, what you need to do is find a way to sort through 100,000 articles and find the ones that are the most relevant to what you're writing about. The tool that you should use is the filtering tool, and every search engine for academic databases has a filtering tool. And you can filter down your results to 20 or 10 articles, sometimes even less. And they're going to be the most relevant and hopefully helpful articles that you can. And usually it's simple things like making sure that the articles are in English and making sure they're peer reviewed, making sure they're from a journal article or an academic journal, not like a magazine or something. And then further, you could say, I want articles that were written within the last 5 years, so it's the most up to date and accurate. Then you can filter the subtopics and you can filter the subtopic of subtopics. And then before you know it, you slowly filter 100,000 articles down to maybe a dozen. And that's great. If you could do that, that's fantastic. But now that you have 12 articles here, maybe you get down to 20, you're going to want to scan the abstracts. You're not going to want to read through 12 or 20 articles, even if they are quite relevant, because not all of them are going to be exactly what you're looking for as far as your topic and evidence go in your paper. So it's useful to scan those abstracts and then maybe pick the ones that stand out the most to you. You can look at those keywords and say, all right, this one's pretty promising. I'm going to set this one aside. I'm going to download the PDF for it. I'll come back to it later. And if you turn the 10 to 20 articles into 5, then that's success. That's good. And then when you get to those 5, you read through them, maybe only 1 or 2 of them. Let's say it was real bad. We only got one source out of those 20 that we found when we filtered down. It's only one good source that we found. And the other ones were just not helpful or promising. What you can do with that one that you found, you can fish for sources in their bibliography. So at the bottom of those academic articles, you scroll down and you'll see their bibliography or their references, works cited, whatever they called them, and look through those sources that they cited and copy and paste the article name and the name of the author and put that into the search bar for your next search. And lo and behold, you'll probably find them. Sometimes you do, sometimes you don't, but it's a good idea to kind of look through those bibliographies and be like, this one sounds like it could be useful. Let me follow up and see if I can find it. And if you can't find it in the virtual library, you could always go to google.com/scholar. And then that's the academic journal or the academic database that Google has. And there's a bunch of articles on there as well. So if you don't find it in the CSU library, you could always go to google.com/scholar and see if you can find it there. And you can rinse and repeat this process a few times. So you can find a promising article, go through the bibliography, pick out a couple articles that you want to follow up on, look those ones up and see if you can find them. And then all of a sudden, you start getting well entrenched, well versed into the discourse and the conversations that all of these experts and scholars have been talking about. And you'll notice that that's when you start getting into the gray area and the cross-referencing, because they're all engaged in very similar conversations and they reference each other in their texts and they don't always agree with each other. So that's when you can really start getting into that academic literature and really learning a lot about what your topic is really about. Now, down here, these are just general strategies. So these are more like tactics, things that you can implement to be real aggressive with your researching process. Now, these are more like strategies, so more of an abstract approach to the researching process. And we have the KWL strategy. This is what you know, what you want to know, and what you learned. This is just a very simple thing to keep in mind. So before you start researching, write down what you know, write down what you want to know. So those research questions, those open-ended questions, no yes or no's, and then talk about what you learned or think about what you learned. And hopefully that'll help you look for more sources, or at least change the way you think about your thesis statement. So that's, just a useful idea to keep in mind. You can use the CRAP method for source evaluation. So when you're doing source evaluation and you're looking at sources and you're like, is this going to be a reliable source, something that's solid that I can trust for my essay? You're going to look at 5 different things here. You're going to look at the credibility, the relevance, the authority of it, so the accuracy and the purpose. So between these 5 things, it should be scoring highly in all those categories. The way you can tell that a source is unreliable is if it's lacking in one of these areas or multiple areas. So again, if you're using objective peer-reviewed publications, you're going to be okay. But if you're just going off of a online keyboard warriors blog, you're going to run into some issues somewhere in here. So just keep that in mind. And let's say you did find maybe, 4 or 5 different sources that you want to use in your essay, but maybe you're not keeping track of them so well, or maybe you want to find a way to organize them into something that's more useful to you. You could use the STRAP method here. That's more for you and your organizational notes, to write down the subject, what type of article it is, the role of whatever essay that you were looking at. So what was the aim of that essay? Who was the audience? What was the purpose of it? And this is more so for your notes before you actually put together an outline or a thesis statement, just so you understand your sources a little bit better and exactly how you want to bring up ideas from each of them, how you plan on synergizing them and whatnot. And then, of course, you got the old middle school, high school, 5 W's and the H. You can always use this to help you organize your research as well. And I'm not going to go over that because it's kind of self-explanatory. Stage 3, thesis statements and outlining. So again, this is the blueprint for your house. Once you get here, you kind of want to have a really solid understanding of what you want to do, what you want to accomplish in your paper. And what you're doing is you're creating a thesis statement, which is probably the most important part of your paper. And I like to think of the thesis statement as north on your compass. So the reason why I say that is everything you write before a thesis statement should lead up to it. Everything you write after should easily trace back to it. And I'm going to go more in depth in that in the next couple slides. And it's just super important. It's north on your compass. It tells you where to go. Now your outline, this is kind of like the skeleton of your essay, the bare bones of it. It's the scaled down version of your essay. Essentially, it's your plan, what you want to accomplish. It's I'm going to talk about this in the introduction. I'm going to talk about this in body paragraph 1. I'm going to talk about this in body paragraph 2, so on and so forth. And you're already going to start plugging in like where you think you're going to use your resources, and how they're going to complement each other. So you're not actually writing the essay yet. You're just planning out where you intend on piecing all these pieces together. And once your thesis statement and your outline are pretty much made, you want to stay true to it because, again, it's like the blueprint for your essay. You're going to want to stick to your blueprint if you're building a house. You're going to want to trust the contractors and your research to follow through with what you intend them to do. Now, there's some more information on thesis statements. We're going to go way more in depth in this in the next slide. If you want to read through this, that's good. It's all helpful information. But the big thing here, the biggest takeaway is it's the foundation of everything you write about and research. Everything written before it has to lead up to it. Everything written after should easily trace back to it. And this slide right here, you should probably take a screenshot or take a picture of it. The thesis statement formula is it's critical. It's critical. And it's something that is helpful not just for this class, but pretty much any undergraduate essay that you write. And you can use this formula for pretty much any short paper that you write. I would say 5, 6 pages or so. Anything with a relatively simple thesis statement, nothing too complex. Now, here's how we're going to build it, right? And the reason why I give you the formula is so you can adapt it, right? We want a repeatable formula for success. We don't want just a one time and done. Uh, by memorizing this formula, you can use it again and again and again with a lot of success. So even though the opposing point of view, my stance is nevertheless important because X, Y, and Z. It looks very simple, it looks very elementary, but it's super important that it's set up this way. And we don't want to neglect any of these pieces here because oftentimes what I see, especially with new students and new college writing, I see this. I just see my stance, and that's their thesis statement. They don't include the opposing point of view. They don't include their X, Y, and Z. They just write my stance. And that tells me one big thing. It tells me that they didn't do their research. And it also tells me they didn't plan ahead. They skipped stages 1 through 3. Because a lot of students will just go to my stance. They won't conduct their research until they're already writing body paragraph 1, 2, and 3, and things are just thrown together, and they never acknowledge opposing point of views at all. So for me, it's very easy to see um, because there is a formula to it. There really is. Now, the real world example here is even though Lang 2013 argues childhood obesity is a societal fault, call that opposing point of view, she nevertheless undermines the important role parents assume to either enable or combat childhood obesity on a micro scale. I'll call that our stance here. Because of their impacts on children's daily habits, we'll call that reason X. Cultivation to self discipline, we'll call that reason Y. And accessibility to healthy and unhealthy food options, we'll call that reason Z. Now, it's important, again, to have that opposing point of view in here. It's a built in rebuttal. And we're going to talk more about that in Unit 6 when we start literally going over how to build introductions sentence by sentence. But you want to have this built in rebuttal component because it shows that you researched all perspectives and that you researched to, or yeah, that you researched to learn and find out rather than prove. You should be just as well versed in Lang 2013 as you are with the sources that you're ultimately going to use to support your X, Y, and Z. And again, having your X, Y, and Z built into your thesis statement shows that you have a source for this, you have a source for this, you have a source for this, or perhaps you have multiple sources for each of these reasons that you're going to discuss further into the paper. So again, it's a very weak way to start an essay, to have a thesis statement that's only your stance, because immediately it tells me as the professor that okay, well where's the outside research? Where is it? And how are they coming to this conclusion? I'm hoping that they'll deliver later on in the paper, but up to this point, I have no confidence because there's no acknowledgement of opposition. There's no anticipation of what's to come. It's just kind of dull. It's just kind of there, right? So that's why each of these parts are so important to the whole, and why it's so important for when it builds an essay later on. Because if we look at this thesis statement formula, we can see very easily that we can outline a whole paper just with one sentence. It's crazy. It's crazy. I know. But once you realize how important this is, and once you start applying it to your writing, all of a sudden you'll see, whoa, writing a paper really isn't that hard. Because if you do your diligence and you go through stages 1 through 3 and you work to build a solid thesis statement, and you don't just jump haphazardly into the writing stage and stage 4, uh, if you take your time and you build this blueprint right, you can have everything laid out before you, all ready to go. You'll already have a source here, a source here, a source there, all things that you can start using right away when you sit down and write your paper. So, very important again, make sure you take a picture of it. Now, building the essay itself. This is the writing. We're going to look at this from a bird's eye view. I'm not going to go into all the specificities of how to build intros, body paragraphs, and conclusions. We're going to talk about that in Unit 6. But right now, what we're going to look at is the conceptual view, right? We're looking at it from a broad point of view. And what we have is our thesis statement. Again, North Star on our compass. Introductions are designed to taper down to a thesis statement. So you kind of start broad and then you slowly narrow down to the thesis. Then everything after the thesis should easily trace back to it. It's all symmetrical. Everything drips from it until you get to the conclusion, and then you can start broadening out and ending on a more abstract note, kind of like how you started broad, you can end broad as well. So that's how things kind of come full circle. Now, if we're going to take this a step further, what we have here is we have our reason X, our reason Y, and our reason Z. And these paragraphs always circle back to that thesis statement. Everything should always funnel back to the thesis statement. Just like I said before, everything before it should lead up to it. Everything written after should easily trace back to it. When you start getting points deducted for organization, sometimes that's because those body paragraphs are out here in left field and they don't easily trace back to the thesis. And the readers are struggling to try to find how to bridge the gap between all these paragraphs and how do they all connect. Everything should be through that thesis statement. Now, this is also a really good analogy I like to talk about when it comes to the writing process, specifically the separation of intros, body, and the conclusion. I like to use the football game analogy. So if we look from a bird's eye view at what an essay is, we have a pregame, we have the game, and then we have the postgame. The introduction is like the pregame warm up. So you basically have a week to prepare, and you have a game plan. You do your stages 1, stages 2, and stages 3 all before you get to the warm up, right? You're not creating the game plan 5 minutes before the game starts. All of that should have been done days before. So when you get to that introduction, you're not actually starting the game yet. You're not trying to score points yet. All you're trying to do is warm up and get ready for the game. And you could think of that as just preparation, right? You're not bringing out all your heavy hitting evidence. You're not, destroying your teammates trying to, tackle your own running back with the ball in pregame warm-ups and potentially get people injured. That's not what it's about. You're just warming up to that thesis statement. Then you have the field, or you got the coin flip there. Now the game begins. This is where, right in here, the body paragraphs, this is where you introduce all your outside sources. This is where you can let your statistics shine and your case studies and your interviews and all that good stuff that makes your topic worth arguing. This is your offensive and defensive cycles where you can, you know, talk about opposing point of views and provide rebuttals and do all that good stuff. Um, that's where all of that can shine. That's the game. Now, the conclusion, we could think of this as the post-game interview. So no one's on the field anymore. No one's trying to score touchdowns 5 minutes after the game ends. So no new evidence here. You're not trying to do heavy hitting statistics anymore. All we're trying to do is talk about the highlights. Talk about our highlights. Talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly. All right, now let's get ready for next week. Let's talk about the future. Let's talk about what's to come. Let's talk about the blind spots in the research and talk about maybe some ideas how we can clear up those blind spots. So it's very useful to think of the essay as this football game. And it's something that you probably never thought about before. In fact, I think I'm the only one that has ever taught this particular analogy. But I think it's very useful because it tells you when and where it's appropriate to start citing your information, including certain information. And it also tells you when it's appropriate to stop and reflect back on the progress made, the insights made, and what else needs to be done, right? So, stage 5, like I said before, this is the proofreading, editing, and revising stage. So if things aren't going the way you plan, you can make those halftime adjustments. Again, we're not throwing away the playbook at halftime. We're just going to tweak some things as we go. That's it. We're just going to tweak some things as we go, making sure that we're playing good, sound, solid football, making sure that we're making a really good paper that isn't going too crazy, right? We don't want to. We don't just like you wouldn't want your favorite football team to play sloppy. We don't want to write those paragraphs sloppy either. So if you have a bad paragraph, just go back and rewrite it or make those adjustments as you go. Using the rubric and the instructions as a final check. Physically bring up that rubric. Make sure that you're staying on task. Make sure you look through it and you hit on all those key points. There's a bunch of methods that you can use to kind of help you proofread, edit it, and revise. But big thing I want to focus on here is using Grammarly. Uh, Grammarly is a fantastic tool. It's kind of like spell check on steroids. You could get the free version. I think it's very useful to use it. You could pay for the premium version, which I think is okay too. I think it's a worthwhile investment, but I don't think you absolutely have to do it. But it does help. And at the end of the day, what Grammarly can do for you is just speed up the process, make it easier for you. That way you can focus on the quality of your ideas more than, hey, where do I need to put this comma, right? And it can help you just kind of keep a better focus on what you're doing. NightCite is another really useful tool, and that's for citing, specifically reference citations. Um, it's better than like what's it called, Citation Machine or some of those other ones out there. So Citation Machine and some of the other reference generators out there, they just require you to copy and paste a URL into them, and then they spit out a reference, and it's usually totally incorrect and wrong. That's how these reference generators get a bad name, because sites like that. But NightCite is actually one of the good ones. If you look it up on Google, you'll find it easily. And it requires a little bit more effort on behalf of the user, so the student, because you have to input the information in these tables that include the author's name and the title of the work and all that stuff. But if you use it for a little while, you'll see how it works, and then it'll give you textbook perfect references every time. It takes a little bit longer to do them, but it's a lot faster than trying to do it all freehand using the CSU reference and citation guide, which is 100 pages plus long. So I would definitely recommend using Night APA template is super important. It's going to save you a lot of time when it comes to formatting your essays, and it takes away a lot of the guesswork involved of, oh, is this supposed to be centered, or am I supposed to put this title here or there? Or it just takes away some of that guesswork. It makes it a whole lot easier to start your papers. So just save the template to your desktop and then just save it in a different name every time you open it up. That way you never overwrite it or save over it. And you could just keep using it over and over and over again. The APA sample papers, you're going to have a sample paper for pretty much every assignment you write at CSU, regardless of the class. And it's a good idea to at least open them up and get a visual reference of what you're supposed to accomplish and how it's supposed to look. Like, for instance, you'll see one for Unit 3. You'll see an APA sample paper for that. And I would recommend opening it up and just checking it out, making sure that your paper is formatted the way it's supposed to. CSU Writing Center is also a really great tool to use to your advantage. You could send your paper into them, and they'll send it back with feedback and revisions. And then YouTube University, you can learn almost anything on YouTube nowadays. And if all of these things are just not helping you, and this PowerPoint's not helping you, and you're still struggling with it, just go to YouTube, look up APA 7th edition, and then whatever you want to look up, whether it's in-text citations or references. Of course, not everything that you'll find is 100% true and accurate, but if you ever have any sort of question or you've come across some sort of discrepancy, you can always just send me a message and I can try to clear it up for you. Now, summarizing this, again, our goal is to create a systematic approach to the writing process. And the reason why systematic is because we can create a reliable and repeatable formula for success, something that we can use beyond just English 1301, something that we can use for all those higher level courses and higher level essays that we are going to face eventually. And then if you happen to be, getting into a master's program later on and you have to write a thesis that's 30, 40, or 50 pages long, well, the writing process is what you're really going to have to fall back onto, because the longer and more complex those papers get, the more intense the planning has to go into those papers. And just like everything else in life, the best planned things are usually the most successful. You look at any sort of big project or anything in the workplace, it doesn't really matter what it is. The things that were planned out the best and the most thorough are usually going to be of higher quality than anything else. And, why would you approach the writing process any differently then? Now, moving on, we've got APA formatting. This is the second half of the video, and hopefully I'll finish before 8:30. That's what I'm aiming for right now. Now, APA formatting, a very brief overview. We've got 4 major components. We've got the cover page, reference page, we got in-text citations, and reference entries. Sometimes you'll see reference entries used or referred to as reference citations, but I like to use a different term to differentiate them from in-text citations. If you look online, or even in the CSU citation guide, you'll probably see this referenced as reference citations rather than reference entries. But I like to make it very clear in my feedback that these are 2 separate things, and I think using different nomenclature helps students understand exactly what I'm talking about when it comes to them, because it can be kind of confusing if I say missing in-text citations, missing reference citations, and you're like, well, I've got citations in there, but I might be like, well, no, the reference is missing, or you have an in-text citation, but no reference citation. It could get confusing if I use nomenclature that's the same. So I'd like to differentiate it that way. Now, when it comes to the general rules for APA formatting, again, just use the APA template, make life easier for you. That way you don't have to memorize too much of this. The cover page should be centered. There's multiple lines on there that need to be centered. The title line needs to be bold. We'll go over that in the next slide. Page numbers should be in the upper right-hand corner. Unless you're using Microsoft 2003, your margin should already be set at 1 inch on all sides. The preferred font is going to be Times New Roman, 12-point font. The body paragraphs should be left aligned, not centered. Double spacing should be applied throughout the entire paper. So that's cover page, body text, and conclusion, or I'm sorry, the reference page. Half-inch indentations should be used for new paragraphs. If the last time you took a writing course was a long, long time ago, don't use the space bar, use the tab key. The tab key will give you a perfect half-inch indentation every time. If you use the spaces, you'll have to hit it like 12 or 15 times. I don't know how many times, but it can be messed up quite easily, and then your indentations won't be flush with each other. They won't be even. So just make it easy on yourself and use that tab key. And then, of course, we got citations and references, and we're going to talk a lot about those in the coming slides. But real quick, we got the cover page here. Again, use the APA template. Make life easier on yourself so you don't have to memorize all this. If you have the APA template, all you have to do is double click it, open it up, and then you can edit all this information, put your own information into it, and then you'll be good to go. In fact, what I would recommend is saving the APA template with your name on it, your degree program, and just have this stuff kind of pre-planned. That way you can open it up and you can save yourself a little bit of time. But the first line, this is your title. It should be bold. You can't see it, but in the upper right-hand corner, there'd be the page number. You don't need any running headers for this course. If you don't know what that is, don't worry about it. Your name would go here. The department, you can use your degree program there, and then Columbia Southern University, English 1301, colon, then you put the course name, you put my name here, and then the submission date. So pretty simple, right? Not too bad. Now, when it comes to the body text, always refer back to those sample papers to make sure everything is kind of in line, or at least you can kind of see that your introduction or that your titles are centered, and you can see that things are the right way. Like if you look at a sample paper and then you compare it with your text, you look at them side by side, it should be very easy for you to see like, oh, there's an indentation here. Let me make sure I've got an indentation on mine. Or this title is centered in bold. Let me make sure that my title is centered in bold. Make sure it's flush with the upper margin on page 2. Oh, let me check to see if there's any weird spacing on my paper. So you can use those sample papers, kind of go back and forth between the two, and just checking them visually to make sure that they look similar. And a lot of APA formatting, at least the general formatting, can be done simply just like that, where you say, let me open up a sample, see how it looks. All right, let me mimic that style in my paper. Now, when it comes to headers, this is a good organizational tool that you can use. You may or may not need them in this class because usually you need them for papers with a little bit more complex thesis, or maybe a little bit longer, maybe 8-10 pages or so. But you could think of level 1 headers as chapters in your text. And then you could think of level 2 headers as chapters within a chapter. So this is more gee-whiz information than something that is critical to your success in this class. But if you happen to need, a chapter in your essay, or something that just creates a little bit better organization, then here's the way to do it. Now, in-text citations, don't confuse complexity with difficulty. I'll be honest, they are complex, but they're not terribly difficult. And we're going to go very in depth with these. And I'll be honest, the majority of points that I take off on papers, especially Unit 3, they're going to pertain to in-text citations. Almost all of them, almost all points I take off are for errors in the formatting. Um, so these rules are definitely worth memorizing or at least taking a picture of because they're going to apply to all in-text citations no matter what course you take. So rule number one, all sentences containing borrowed information, whether it's directly quoted, paraphrased, or summarized, must be cited. Rule number two, all in-text citations must be formatted correctly and appropriately according to the source's available information and the way in which the source was used. I'm going to talk about that in a few more slides, and I'm going to go exactly what I mean by available information and the way in which it was used. Um, Rule number three, all sources cited must have either a parenthetical or narrative citation. I'm going to have some slides that go over the difference there. And then rule number four, all sources cited in text must be listed on the reference page. And the inverse of that rule is also true. Any sources that are listed on the reference page should be cited at least once somewhere in the text. Now, when it comes to direct quotes, so I mentioned up there, anything that's directly quoted needs to be cited. So when it comes to a direct quote, you always want to lead into it with your natural writing voice. They should never be left in isolation. They can't just be plopped right into the middle of a paragraph without any sort of transition in. You typically want to have some sort of flow with them, and I'll go over that here. But another important note with direct quotes is that they have to have a page or a paragraph number included in the in-text citation. And I'm going to go over that in a couple more slides when we go over actual examples of those in-text citations. But just for now, remember, direct quotes absolutely need a page or a paragraph number. Now, common transitional words or phrases to go into those direct quotes, because again, you always want to lead into it with your natural voice. According to, that's probably the easiest, most simplest transition you can use. We'll talk about others in Unit 6, but for now, according to is a very easy, very quick, very smooth way to just transition into a narrative citation. According to Jones, according to Jefferson and Hamish, according to Robinson et al. Very simple, very easy. We're not just plopping those direct quotes in there without any sort of, regard to flow or readability. Avoid excessively long quotes, 40 plus words. This is not an arbitrary number. 40 words in APA style, anything over 40 words needs to have something called block quotations. I don't teach block quotations in this course because the papers are not proportionate or long enough to warrant the need for them. Because in this class, we're writing relatively short papers. And there's really zero reason to have any sort of quote longer than 40 words. So, again, I'm not going to teach it. So if I see in your papers in Unit 3 or Unit 7 that you have an exceedingly long quote in there, I'll say, hey, did you watch the lecture? I talked about this specifically. Don't use excessively long quotes because they need block quotations, and I don't teach them in this class. Ultimately, those quotes should be proportionate to the length of the assignment. So when you get to those longer papers, those 8 to 10 page papers, then it's more appropriate to use those kind of tools in your writing. You can get away with using longer quotes. When it comes to paraphrasing, it's putting it into your own words. And the key thing here is that when you're paraphrasing, you don't need specific page numbers or paragraph numbers. That's only for those direct quotes. And another thing is that you also don't need quotation marks around your paraphrased information, whereas with those direct quotes you do. Now, with summarizing, it's the same kind of thing. Summarizing is very similar to paraphrasing in the sense that You're not using quotation marks around the information, and you don't need a specific page or paragraph number when citing them. Now, here's a bunch of variations of in-text citations. I'm going to go through all of these because they're all worth knowing and memorizing. You don't need to memorize exactly everything, but you need to know that. I would say just to know that you can use this as a reference for 90% of the citations that you're going to end up writing in your entire college journey. Most of them. This isn't a comprehensive list because there are some other variations that aren't listed here. And this is where it kind of gets complex because a lot of these parts are interchangeable with each other. But once you kind of get the feel for it, it's not terribly difficult, like I mentioned before. So the author date method is very simple. It's going to be the author's last name, comma, the year of publication. Very simple. Now, if we had a page attached to that, that's because we used a direct quote as opposed to a paraphrase or a summary. So the author date page method, the only thing that's different is that this citation is used for a direct quote, which would warrant the need for a specific page or a paragraph number. And you could use the abbreviation of that lowercase p and the period and then the page number. If there were multiple pages, you would put two lowercase p's and then the period. Now, the author date paragraph method looks a little different. So you'd have the last name, the year of publication, and then the abbreviation para for paragraph. Now, you might ask yourself, well, why would I use a page number over a paragraph number or vice versa? So for most online journal articles that you find in the virtual library, they're going to have some sort of page number because typically everything that's in the virtual library is also published in some sort of journal article that eventually goes into circulation. So those will have physical page numbers. But if you're online on, like, let's say the CDC website or some governmental website or whatever, a lot of online sources don't have physical page numbers because they never have the intent of being published and circulated in a physical book. So you'll have to count the paragraph in which that directly quoted information appears. Now, if you have two authors in the same source, use the ampersand symbol to separate the authors' names. And notice we don't have any first initials here, right? We don't have the word and here. It's very simple. It's just the last name, ampersand, other last name. If we happen to have a direct quote, we could use that page or paragraph number and attach it on the end of that citation. If you have three or more authors, you can use this little abbreviation et al., which is Latin for and all, and you can use that instead of having to write out 6 or 7 authors' last names. And just as we talked before, you can use that paragraph or page number if you have a direct quote. So again, you have the summarization or paraphrase, you don't need that page or paragraph number. But if you do have a direct quote, you got to have that page or paragraph number. Now, in the instance you have an unknown author, so you can't find it anywhere on the website, totally unknown, no idea who wrote it. You can write the article name in quotation marks and put the year of publication. Titles of books and reports are italicized. Titles of articles, chapters, web pages are in quotation marks. Simple. If there is an unknown year, you can use the abbreviation N period D period, which stands for no date. So if you can't find a publication year, you can't find a copyright to save your life, you could put ND, no date. And this is interchangeable. So you could put that with an unknown author as well. Like if all you have is an article and there's no date, and that's the information you got to go on. That's the available information that you can use. So based on the available information you can use, it will influence how you create these in-text citations, just like we talked about That's rule number 2 of the in-text citations. If there's no author, you can't put something there, right? If there's no date, you can't put something there other than ND. So you gotta kind of adapt as you go based on what is available to you. But don't be lazy with it either, because I often check those URLs and make sure that if it says no date, I'm going to look and make sure that there's no date. And if there's no author, I'm going to look to make sure there's no author. I'm kind of crazy like that. So just be on your toes. Now, anonymous author, this is differentiating it from the unknown author here. Anonymous author means that it literally needs to say by anonymous, which is actually quite rare. Just make sure that if there's an unknown author, you don't write anonymous. They're two very separate things. Anonymous, this is quite rare, but if there's an unknown author, just use that article title. This is very common, using the organization as an author. So there is just one rule when it comes to this. The very first time you cite it in your paper, it needs to be spelled out completely. So in this case, Center of Disease Control. And then anytime after that, if you cite it again, you can use a abbreviation form or abbreviated form. So CDC or DOD or DOT or whatever you're citing. And then you can also use direct quotes for these sources as well. Multiple sources, this is opposed to 2 authors or 3 authors. This is of the same source. So 2 authors working on the same source. 3 or more authors working on the same source. Multiple sources, this is 2 separate sources. They just happen to be cited in the same sentence. You could separate them with that semicolon there. Everything else still applies. If you need, if you have a direct quote or something, you could put that page or paragraph number in there. Likewise over here. Now, when it comes to parenthetical in-text citations, they're usually located at the end of a sentence. And notice the period that ends or terminates the cited sentence has to go after it. So I'm going to go ahead and read this example because I think it's insightful, and it really reinforces a lot of the things that we just talked about in the last couple slides. And it makes a little bit more sense when you see it written in a paragraph, because it provides a model that you can kind of mimic in your writing. So most in-text citations should look something like this, with a period after the parentheses. So we have Ramirez, comma, 2017, with a period at the end. It's not over here. If you include any direct quotes from someone else, including the author's last name, year, page number, and parentheses at the end, here is an example. So this would be a direct quote. So what do we need with a direct quote? We need a page number. So here we see Ramirez, 2017, page 26. If a work has 3 or more authors, the in-text citation includes only the first author's last name, and then et al. Like this. So just like we talked about in the last slide, we have Stein et al. Period, comma, 2019. Then the period that terminates the sentence will go after the citation, not before it. So when you look at this example, it starts putting things into perspective. It starts making a little bit more sense, right? Now, narrative in-text citations are a little bit more advanced, in my opinion, and they can occur somewhere in the beginning or the middle. We talked about a few slides ago that it's a useful way to kind of use a narrative citation, like according to sort of transition into a direct quote. And that would be a form of narrative citation as well. So I'm going to go ahead and read this one as well. If you would rather not have so many parentheses breaking up the flow of your text, you can work the in-text citation into what you're writing. For example, you can explain in your narration how Pavlov et al., 2019, page 5, are known for their research into classical conditioning with animals, while Skinner and Furster, 1957, studied reinforcement of behavior in children. So this is a really smooth example of a narrative in-text citation, because what is the alternative to this? Well, the alternative would be putting all of this information separated with a semicolon from all of this information right here at the very end of that sentence, which would be a huge hindrance to the flow of the text because that's a lot of information to put into an in-text citation at the end of a sentence. It really would break up. It would be like a speed bump, hitting a speed bump in the middle of that body paragraph, and we don't want that. Um, so strategic placement of in-text citations. We're going to talk a lot more about this in Unit 6 because we're going to literally break down how to build introductions, body paragraphs, and conclusions sentence by sentence. But right now, we're just going to cover one very brief idea. So when you're introducing cited sentences into a body paragraph, keep them somewhere in the middle. Don't kick off a body paragraph with a cited sentence. Don't end a paragraph with a cited sentence. Keep them in the middle. And I'm going to explain a lot more about that in Unit 6 as to why we would do that and why we should do that. But for now, the takeaway that I want you to have is just think of the top sentence as the top bun of the sandwich. Think of sentence 6 as the bottom bun of the sandwich. Somewhere in the meat and the vegetables, that's where you put that cited sentence. Keep it somewhere in the middle. Now, an appropriate ratio for cited in original sentences is about 1 to 5 for lower courses. So that means roughly one outside source per body paragraph should be cited. 2 for 6, so slightly higher for higher level courses. And the reason why I like to touch on this is because you could go two extremes here. You could cite almost nothing in your essay, and obviously that wouldn't be good because then you'd have an essay that really just relies on you and your own experience, and it's going to be kind of underwhelming in that sense. Not to say that you don't have the experience, but ultimately, when it comes to the academic world, it's crucial to incorporate outside research to support your ideas. So, on one hand, having no research is bad, but having too much cited information is also bad because ultimately, what you're doing with your education is becoming knowledgeable, well versed in your field, yes. And you're also going to go back to your workplace and hopefully make meaningful changes in your workplace. And ultimately, what we want to avoid is just regurgitating all this information verbatim from all these outside sources without taking a critical mind and looking at ways we can synergize those ideas with other research and, of course, our own ideas and our own experience. So, what we want to do is look at research in a complementary way. We don't want it to not have a say at all in our writing or conversations, but we also don't want it to dominate our conversation so much that it overshadows the way in which we synergize it with everything else that we've researched and of course our own ideas, because at the end of the day all academic writing is aimed towards what is my contribution going to be to my field and to my workplace. It's not about just regurgitating what's already out there. If that's the case, well, why doesn't our employer just hire chat gpt for everything, right? So if that's the case, you know, just think about that. It's an important thing to kind of keep in mind. So what needs to be cited? Pretty much, anything that's not considered common knowledge. And this is a bit arbitrary. It's kind of hard to kind of think about what needs to be cited and what doesn't, because a lot of things might seem common knowledge to you, but they might not to others. Um, in general, like extreme general circumstances, think what would a high schooler know? And if they don't know it, cite it. But you could also think outside of that and think, well, let's say you got a brand new person in your department and it's a Pro-B firefighter. What do I expect them to know coming out of their training? And you could think, okay, if they would know it, then I don't have to cite it. But if I think that they don't know it, then I should cite it. When in doubt, cite it so you don't get in trouble, because some professors are quite strict on it. But again, it's kind of an arbitrary thing, because let me say, if you happen to be giving a presentation for a panel of experts, or let's say a panel of fire chiefs, well, all of a sudden, what is considered common knowledge is vastly different. And that would influence greatly what you cite and what you don't cite, and exactly how you present as well. So, again, the audience makes a big difference when it comes to this. In general, when it comes to academics, I would say be cautious. When in doubt, cite, and just demonstrate that you did your research, mostly so you don't lose points on your papers. And what can be cited? A whole lot more than you think. So this PowerPoint can be cited. Any videos that you come across, or YouTube videos, those can be cited. Unpublished manuscripts, workplace documents, as long as it's not personal identifiable information, personal health information, anything that's classified, and as long as you have permission from your workplace to use it, you can absolutely cite that and include it in your academic research. You can conduct personal interviews with your supervisor, or your fire chief, or your deputy in your department, or whoever. Anyone that has a bunch of research and has awesome ideas that can contribute to, the academic conversation that you're immersed in, you can absolutely interview those people and include manuscripts of those conversations in your appendix of your essays, and you can take those ideas and run with them. In fact, I would encourage you to do that, because a big thing when it comes to academic writing is coalescing the worlds of academics and the real world, the practical world, because both of them have strengths, both of them have weaknesses, they both have a lot to offer to each other. And it's about time, people are, street smart and book smart, not just one or the other. And that's kind of what I'm emphasizing here, is that make sure that, you don't discount anyone's ideas, and you don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, so to speak, when it comes to academic research or someone's experience. I mean, if you find a fire chief that's got 40 years of experience, they are definitely going to have useful things to contribute to whatever you're writing about, or whatever topic that you're writing about. And that carries just as much weight as any academic journal that you can come across, right? So definitely use that stuff to your advantage. Now, in-person conversations, emails, text messages, all that stuff can be cited too. Not that I would want you to cite a bunch of text messages in your paper, because again, those things don't carry a whole lot of weight. But the important thing is you can cite them, just like you can cite OSHA, you can cite NFPAs, you can cite all those different kind of things in your papers. Now the reference page here, I'm not going to talk too much about this, but I just want you to look at the general overview of it. Notice that we have the title references centered in bold, and notice it's plural. It's not just references. It's not works cited. It's not bibliography. It's references. It's very simple. And after that, you'll notice that all these references are listed in alphabetical order. And you'll see this weird looking indentation. It's inversed, whereas most indentations would be that first line. When it comes to these references, they're actually backwards. And this is a special kind of indentation called hanging indentations. And it's very simple to apply to your reference page. If you use NightSight, it'll help you create all these references. And most of the time, it applies that hanging indentation for you. But if you want to learn how to do it, it's very simple. All you do is highlight the text, you right click, you go to paragraph, and you change the special category from none to hanging. And there's a bunch of really good short YouTube videos on it as well. So they're only a minute or two long, and you could just follow along with them. And you learn it once and you'll know it forever. It's very simple to do. But just keep that in mind. And avoiding discrepancies in text citations and references. I touched on that earlier. It's just anything that's cited in text has to be listed on the reference page, and the inverse of that is true. So any source listed on the reference page has to be cited at least once somewhere in the text. And then a note on uniformity. I touched on this earlier about the professional appearance of a paper. Back talking about stage 5 of the writing process, that proofreading, editing, and revising. Well, one of the things you should be looking for as well is making sure that your formatting is squared away, and making sure that everything in your paper is double spaced from cover page to the very last of your references, making sure that it's all Times New Roman, .12 font. These little things make a big difference. They make a real big difference because at the end of the day, like I said, your paper could be the perfect paper. It could have all the evidence presented in the best way possible. But if it looks sloppy from the outside, you're gonna put your readers on their heels, and they're gonna think, well, what else is wrong? Why should I trust what they have to say if they can't even make sure that the font is consistent throughout the paper? You could see, like, you could have a great paper, but like these little things make a big difference. If you copy and paste a direct quote somewhere in your paper and then all of a sudden the font changes from Times New Roman to Arial and the point goes from 12 to 11, that's sloppy. You might have good ideas, but it looks sloppy. And at the end of the day, I was in the military, so I'm sure some of you guys may have heard this before, but perception is reality, right? If if it looks bad, it's going to be perceived bad, and they're going to think, well, what else is wrong? And this kind of lesson carries over into the workplace, because the more professional you can communicate with your peers in the workplace, um, the more credibility you can have because your writing voice is a representation of you and your thoughts and ideas. So take pride in it and make sure it's polished. Any questions? Anything at all? Let's see. Anything? Questions? Well, if you guys don't have any questions, that's totally okay. You can always email me. You can send me a message in the classroom. Whatever works for you, I'm here for you. If I don't know the answer, I'll always try to find the answer for you. But when it comes to all this stuff, I know it's a lot of information. There was 39 slides and, an hour and 30 minutes of a lot of dense information. So what'll happen here is, um, if you guys don't have any questions, you guys are free to go. What I would like you to do as soon as you get out of here, make sure that you go to the Unit 3 assignment link and complete it real quick. All you have to do is say, I attended the live lecture, because all you guys were here. You're on my course roster, and I got your names down already. So just make sure that you go through that link and submit it, because that's how you're actually going to get credit for the assignment. And tomorrow morning, I'll go in and grade it. So if you do it tonight, you'll have a grade tomorrow. And now, if you're watching this recording at a later time, there's a little bit of an extra step that you'll have to do. If you did not attend the lecture and you're watching this recording, you're going to have to go through and answer the question and write 3 short paragraphs as to what your 3 biggest takeaways were from the video. But that's all I have for you guys. You guys are free to go. Again, if you got questions, please let me know. And if not, that's all right. Just have a good night. Stay safe out there. And I look forward to seeing your Unit 3 essays next week. All right. Take it easy, guys. Good night.